This is an excerpt from Highways and Hedges, The Life of E. Faith Stewart by Grace G. Henry. Chapter 21. Problems and Perils of the Missionary. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? A short time after purchasing the place El Hogar at Los Pinos, before the present main building was built, warnings were sent out that there were high winds at sea, and that surely a cyclone was forming and moving inland. As the angry clouds hung in the heavens, men were sent out into the city to warn everybody, and also help them to put up storm shutters or nail up the windows against the onslaught of the strong winds that were sweeping inland. Clouds filled with water banked in the sky and raced swiftly with fast-moving winds and poured out torrents of water, adding much to the great destruction in general. The strong wind swept through the land, and the great palms bent their proud heads. Stronger blew the blast, and they were thrown over on their sides, and the roots exposed. A frame building in the rear of the homes went down, and was completely wrecked. The storm had begun between 7 and 8 in the evening, and even then falling trees and other obstructions caused all lights to be turned off in the city, and the water mains were shut off. Through the long sleepless hours of the night, howling winds raged, and torrents fell. Then daylight came, and the faithful men of the Red Cross, risking their lives, came out several times over the city, each group chosen to look after a certain field. The one that visited El Hogar was the group that was chosen to see after the institutions with children. They came that day faithfully as before, through the awful drenching rain, the piercing winds, tired out and weary with the task at hand. "You must move all the children downstairs," they said. "But we have moved down to these back rooms, and the water has poured in until the children are having to stay on the beds to keep out of the streams of water running in from the windows and the door. But you will have to move out of these rooms to the space under the side of the house. There is no floor. The rooms have never been dug out. Only a natural bank is there, with a dirt floor and a lattice protecting the space. It is not a very good place for little children. True, but if these winds hold out much longer, part of this house may go. It is safer for the children under the roof on the bank of dirt than out where some wall may cave in at any time or some part go down. It is better for the children to take a slight cold from a damp place over a day or two and be nursed back to health when this is over than to risk their lives." So with the help of the Red Cross men and the soldiers, the children were brought down. Also there was a good fire built in the basement kitchen of the building, and water kept hot on the stove. No one could say when some part of the structure might give way under the heavy pounding and merciless lashing of the winds and injure a number or all of them. So when the Red Cross men came in, cold, wet, and weary, in mercy and appreciation of their kindness in time of stress, these missionaries took some of the hot water, coffee, and condensed milk, and made large tin cups of coffee or either some cups of cocoa. They left refreshed and strengthened for the dangerous and heavy tasks at hand. Also, they were deeply impressed with the calm they found. Everywhere else in the city, in the other institutions they visited, they found workers and attendants frightened by the raging winds and the awful noises of the breaking trees and the houses breaking apart. Roofs were tearing loose and flying into the mad whirlpool of winds, and the workers became hysterical, and the children, seeing their fear, also added their tears and cries to that of the elders. At El Hogar they found the children sitting in order, singing the songs of the Sunday school, and at another time the men found them all kneeling in prayer. Suffice it to say, this fact made an impression on one of the men, so that afterward he sought out the home, and becoming interested was converted, and was for several years at the head of the boys' home, and later served as pastor and as secretary for the mission. This was Horatio Morales. All that day the winds came and swept over the island. The house next door to the mission was badly wrecked in the awful storm. The house across the street from the home had the roof and one side blown away. But at El Hogar, a loving Heavenly Father watched over where so many of his little ones were sheltered, and it was not harmed save in minor ways. The second awful night of the wild storm, the children and the workers stayed all together under the floor of the second story, where the bank of dirt was so high and the top so low that the taller ones had to sit down, with only a dirt floor beneath them and an open lattice at each end. The fearful elements shrieked and howled as the night wore on, and water poured through the basement rooms. Workers took brooms and kept sweeping in a desperate effort to sweep the water in the direction of the rear door. Workers among the men who so kindly came and opened a place in the rear so that the water could be swept out and not back up to where the little children were housed. They waited about, working in cheerful cooperation until every broom in the place was broken and darkness fell and little could be done. All through the night the patient little ones were cared for as the long weary hours wore on, and at last the night came to an end, and about 6 o'clock the next morning the sun suddenly broke out, bright and shining. Some brave workers put out their heads to see if the worst was over, but a soldier standing on a watch called out, "Shut the door, do not risk your life. The storm may not be over yet." So they withdrew obediently for 2 more hours, fearing that the winds might turn again in fury and wreak more destruction to life and property. And then when they opened their doors, they marveled, for they came forth from a building where there was no solid wall of protection, where only the open lattice stood between them and the driving rain. But the rain, swept by the winds, was miraculously diverted from the unprotected space with the children by a great and unseen hand, and driven in a stream downward into the vacant room beyond. God had been protecting them through all this, through the long stormy hours of the night. And as they counseled together and realized the direct hand of the loving Father, their hearts were lifted up in gratitude as they counted their blessings. "I saw what I think no one else saw during the storm." This came from a new member of the staff of the workers at the mission, who was not at that time a Christian. "What did you see?" they asked her. "I saw at each end of the building, where it was open to the rain and storm, a hand which seemed to be resting there to turn back the storm from the children. I never saw anything like it before," she said quietly. Not long after this experience of seeing the providential hand of God working in behalf of his little ones, she became a Christian. Thus the temporal loss and the imposed inconvenience was made to yield 2 precious souls for God's kingdom. Like Noah coming out of the ark after the flood, they too emerged from their close quarters out on the grounds of the homes, and saw the beautiful tall royal palms that bordered the grounds torn out by the roots and bent halfway to the ground. Everywhere wreckage was piled up, here and there, buildings torn apart, streets broken up, and great cavities in roads and fields. All small animal life was almost entirely destroyed over the island where the devastation had been rife, and the scene was one of general disorder in nature where men had erected buildings. Thank God, as they looked about them, they had not only the lives that they had been spared of everyone, but that God had kept them in comparative comfort from the deluge, and had as well protected the property from severe damage. They had only to look about them to realize the mighty hands of God had truly been spread out in mercy to protect the buildings. And moreover, he had indeed fulfilled the promise in Psalms 91:2. "I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in him will I trust." Verse 5, "Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night." Verse 6, "Nor the destruction that wasteth at noonday." Verse 7, "There shall no evil befall thee." Verse 11, "For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways."